For people to think like a scenario planner as they go through this, let's talk through some of the points that they ought to consider. For instance, one of your points is question everything. What do you mean by that?
Well, very often people have biases and opinions, and they're very closely tied to various ideas and concepts. And so one of the things you want to do is question the underlying assumptions, mostly that you have personally, but also that organizations have. It's very difficult, of course, to question the biases and assumptions of other people, but the scenario process brings that to light through the way that it actually develops, because those people are having that same experience that you are, right? They're actually being confronted with ideas that make them uncomfortable. And so they're now questioning yeah, that's how I thought classrooms were going to look 20 years from now, but maybe I'm not so sure now. And that's okay. You want to get to the point that you're not so sure and you're comfortable with your discomfort.
So if you're questioning everything, how can you think strategically?
Well, because you want to think about the implications of that thinking for the organization. So there's the difference between tactical and strategic. Tactical would mean I'm trying to do something in the moment, I'm doing it on kind of the low end, versus I'm thinking about the entire university system, for instance, and what's its structure, and how do we think about learning, and how do we think about student achievement on a broader sense, versus a tactical view might be, how do I help, if I'm a faculty member, how do I help a particular student achieve something in that future, versus how do I help all students achieve better. And so I'm trying to think as a scenario planner about that bigger question.
So how do you resolve that tension between trying to get closure and knowing when it's time to stop your analysis?
Yeah, that's, it's very interesting in scenario planning, because that's that tension between analysis paralysis and closure is often one that I caution people at the beginning of a process, that if you fall into one of those camps, it's going to be a difficult journey for you going forward. Because if you want to have an answer to something very quickly, scenario planning is not going to give that to you, because you're already at the beginning saying, I'm looking 10, 15, 20 years ahead, right? That's a given. And so you're not going to get the answer to the how do I do something tomorrow better, right? On the flip side, if you're somebody who never wants to make a decision and you want to just bask in the future and look at the data and ruminate over it, then you're also going to have difficulty, because at the end of the day, scenario planning does ask you to take an action, to think about what the organization is going to do, to decide on a direction. Of course, you're going to be kind of purposefully watching for what happens as the future unfolds and making adjustments and navigating through that future, but you're going to make some choices and you're going to take direction. So in order to manage that, you really have to, first of all, get steeped in the scenario planning process and kind of buy into it. If you remain attached to those two poles, it is going to be a difficult process for you. And so good scenario planners live in the middle, and they're able to look at the future in an unbiased, open way, but they're also willing to make some bets and move forward.
So what does it mean to be curious during this process?
Well, curiosity in scenario planning is very much about not staying within your discipline. Because if you do nothing but look at the literature of education, for instance, you're going to end up in an echo chamber of people who are thinking about things often in the same way, versus are you looking at how professional development is happening in business? Are you looking at other ways that people are independently learning, right? Are you looking at other models of giving people credit for their learning that are coming from other sources? I've done work in aerospace, for instance, and one of the things that aircraft wing designers love is a new discovery of a fossil of some flying animal that has a completely different aerodynamic structure of anything they've ever seen before. And so they can learn from paleontology something that they would never learn in aerospace engineering school, at least not right at that moment of discovery. And so being curious and open and looking outside is very important to giving you a way of informing the kinds of questions that you're asking.
So if you're doing all this work to be curious and kind of divergent, how do you become collaborative in this process?
Well, There's a difficulty in visioning often because senior leaders in an organization will take that upon themselves to say, you know, we're going to set the direction of the organization. Scenario planning, because of the diversity of people involved in the process, wants to bring people together and create a consensus view of the future, a consensus way of navigating that future. And so the collaboration within the scenario planning project is really looking at the people, you know, if you've got students, faculty, services, administration all working together, for instance, in a scenario planning view on the future of learning, you want them to work together so that there's no feeling of, you know, one group is trumping the other, because the students might have just as valid an input as anyone else.
And finally, what does it mean to be holistic when you're going through this process?
When you think holistically, you're looking at the world from all directions, and that really is forced in scenario planning through the STEEP view, right? So the social, technological, economic, environmental, and political gets you away from just saying, I'm looking at education, or I'm looking at banking, or I'm looking at retail, right? So you want to look at the forces of the world. And as soon as you get away from that, you start getting too narrow. You start thinking about the, you know, what's in it for us, and not what are the things that are going to affect us from the outside. And so thinking holistically means bringing in a broad global world perspective, multidiscipline perspective, because the disruptions that happen in one area may actually already be occurring someplace else. You may just not realize that they're related to you or could affect you. And so you have to be able to look outside of your discipline to the broader world.